Today's episode is sponsored by Nerva, a non-invasive, evidence-based, at-home IBS management tool. Nerva is an app that provides gut-directed hypnotherapy through a structured 6-week program followed by a maintenance plan. Use the link in show notes to try Nerva today for 30% off. Welcome back to The Gut Show. I'm your host, Erin Judge, and today's episode is extra special because we have a guest, Kate Scarlata, who is a dietitian based in the U.S. with over 30 years of experience. Kate's expertise ranges from GI disorders, food intolerance, and she specifically is focused on the low FODMAP diet for functional gut disorders in her practice. Not only is Kate a leading dietitian in the country. She's involved in speaking, in research, and also helps train dietitians across the country and the world. What is so great about today's conversation is that we get to highlight a specific area of interest that Kate has had, and that is on food insecurity and kind of the pain that comes along with that for those who live with digestive disorders and food intolerances. And so we're talking about her campaign, the End Hunger Pain Initiative, and we're just kind of talking about some of the nuance that's involved in food insecurity, specifically to those who have specific food needs like allergies and intolerances. So whether that's you or not, we're going to cover resources for you, but we're also going to talk about ways to get involved and just increasing our own awareness so that we can support our own communities in a better, kind of more productive and helpful way. So enjoy today's episode. And as always, if you want to connect, ask questions, share a resource yourself, join us over at the Gut Community on Facebook. I'd love to hear from you and hear your takeaways as you wrap up the episode. Hey, Kate, thank you so much for being on the podcast and the episode today. I want to go ahead and just get started with your story. How did you become the leader that you are now in the area of nutrition for digestive disorders?
So great question. When life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. And in 1994, when I was pregnant with my middle son, I developed a strangulated intestine and required major small intestinal resection. I lost 6 to 8 feet of my small intestine. And the GI doctor or the surgeon just said, go out and eat a big steak. See you later. And, of course, I had a number of manifestations from the surgery. And so it just prompted really, the whole notion that patients are kind of left out on their own sometimes, like navigate this space. And we certainly see this in the irritable bowel syndrome space, both of us. And so it just prompted me to really dig into the research and get to know what we do know is fact versus fiction, and really be able to translate that science into tools for patients. So I am a nerd and I love reading science, and this area of GI nutrition is just really expanded. And so I would print out about 15 articles a week. And I loved every minute of it, just highlighting, reading, forming my own critical analysis of where the research was going, always follow the science. And I found that I really enjoy amplifying the voice of the patient, but also my fellow dietitians, which led me into researching with gastroenterologists most recently, what they found to be the barriers and benefits of using a dietitian in the GI space. So it's an area that, started with kind of a bad situation, but has been really a phenomenal journey and a rewarding career.
That's awesome. And I like that you brought that up, because I know a lot of dietitians in specialty areas do have personal experience. And that's what kind of leads that, is the connection to the patients, the connection to care, the evidence and the science, but also some of that personal, which allows, I think, for more empathy, which I know that you share a lot. And, for those who are not familiar with you and your work, you're an author, a renowned author, which is probably what a lot of people may recognize first. You're a speaker in the professional space. You're an advocate on the patient side, but you also had a practice. Tell us a little bit more about that and what that looked like and how you actually were on the ground kind of working as you were gaining this knowledge and experience.
Absolutely. So, I've been in practice for a gazillion years. So like late 1980s, which is crazy. Okay. So, I had to really, when the FODMAP space sort of started permeating the research area, there were no patient education handouts. There were no GI nutrition assessments. There was nothing. And so I really had to think, okay, what am I writing down a million times to educate the patient, or where are the gaps in patient education tools? So that's really where I think I helped this area a lot, is just really translating science into tools for patients and clinicians to use. Educational tools that I've created. Every day I get an order, and it's South Africa, Barcelona, Spain. It's really interesting. So it's nice to see that they've made a difference. They've been used in research, centers. So things have really evolved over this time, and I've had to create a lot of the tools and shared a lot of tools with other clinicians, to help move the field forward.
Yeah. And that's something a lot of people may not know if you're not in the area of nutrition, or maybe you are a patient and you've gotten, a handout from somebody. That doesn't just happen by chance. And especially in the field of nutrition, and then diving even deeper to the field of GI nutrition. So nutrition is so new and evolving. GI nutrition is also new and evolving every single day. And so those handouts and resources and books, and even the talks that you've been able to give, have played such a major role in what we do and what I get to do as a dietitian 4 years in to my practice with GI. So one thing that you've done a great job of is you're on stages, around the world. You've been on stages leading talks for clinicians and looking at kind of this high level view of what the science is saying, what we do, and how to train dietitians. What you've also done is you've been on the ground with patients, and you've done that really well through your online space. You were blogging. I know before that was really a big thing, right? You were blogging before even FODMAPs were hot, and you were at the start of that. You've also been really active on Instagram and through communities. And I want to talk a little bit about that, because I know you've had some initiatives that have come out of that to connect. But where did that begin? Was the goal to connect with the patient directly? Was there just a creative outlet that you wanted personally? Or how did you begin to form kind of this online presence and connection space?
Great question. So yeah, to backtrack, I was in patient care, have seen thousands and thousands and thousands of patients, for 30 years. So that was really a bulk of my career and my, the love of my life and rewarding experiences. I decided to blog a while back, and I really should look exactly when that was, my first blog post, but the intent was really to share my lifestyle, because I felt like my husband and I really had a well-balanced life, and we were traveling and enjoying each other and really loving on our 3 kids and just really balancing things really nicely. It was something that my friends always said, you figured it out. You figured that way to do that. So I started a blog, and it was well-balanced, food, life, travel, and that was my intent. But you can see on the back end what people are looking for, and everyone was looking for FODMAP information. And I thought to myself, well, if the audience wants FODMAP information, I can bring that. I'm happy to do that. And so it sort of was driven by my followers, so to speak. And yet it was such a big platform for me, because no one was blogging really about FODMAPs except for Patsy Katzos, another colleague in this space. So it just kind of blew up. And, being in the right space at the right time and listening, right? Listening to what people want. And I also wanted to honor what I wanted, and I wanted to share that information. So it was a marriage made in heaven. Twitter became kind of an interesting platform, and I had a colleague, an entrepreneurial colleague, say, get on Twitter. You need to get on Twitter. And so I jumped in really early, and it's been an interesting platform. And what I love about Twitter is you get access to early release of articles, and I use that from a professional standpoint. Someone will share their article they just published, and I'm right in and printing it out. I love reading. So that's been really the big asset for me, I think, for Twitter. And then Instagram, I've always been a creative. My mother was an artist. My 3 kids are in creative careers because of her, I believe, because she had a really big influence on them and certainly had a big influence on me. I had a card making business when I was, had young kids and used to sell my cards to boutiques all in Boston and the coastal community, and did that with a friend. I've always really liked the creative outlets. So Instagram kind of came naturally. Photography was something I enjoyed. I have 2 kids that one's a videographer, one's a photographer. And so, it just kind of came hand in hand. So that got me into the Instagram world. And I love that. I love the creative aspects. I would say, having been in the platform for a long time, I loved the authenticity that Instagram used to be. It's really moved into this very curated space, which, is beautiful. And I love beautiful photography, but it's just a little less authentic. And I think puts a lot of pressure on professionals to constantly up their game. And I wish we could move a little bit away from that, because I think it's unnecessary pressure. And yet you've got to rally if you want to play in the pool, So
Yeah.
That's my take on those platforms. But absolutely, you have to go where people are, right? And people are on social media, so it's important as professionals that we're on there too.
Yeah, and it makes such a big difference for patients and for those who are seeking information to see, professionals who are following the science, sharing the science, breaking it down into application, encouraging, seeing a side of professionals that they may not see, every day at an appointment, or maybe they don't have access to professionals who are specialized. It can make such a huge difference. And you mentioned that one thing that you've done from the beginning is listen. You take time to listen to what people are saying. You listen to the scientists. You also listen to the patients. One big campaign that you launched last year, which I know came out of listening, so I want to hear kind of more about that backstory, was your End Hunger Pain initiative. What was the purpose of this? Kind of what were you hearing that led to you starting this, and what did you really accomplish out of that campaign?
Yeah, so I'll tell you that my mom and I share this, where we would say we have a bee in our bonnet, right? So you got a bee in your bonnet and you got to act on it. That's how my mother and I definitely got that from my mom. And, I was just, we're a year into the pandemic, and, people were really hurting, and there was, a lot of people out of work. And I thought, just kind of had some aha moments, honestly, where it was like, how is this food insecurity, affecting people that are also food intolerant or have allergies to foods? Because we know that these specialized foods, 1, are more expensive. 2, they're very rarely found at a food pantry. And 3, for our IBS patients, and just in general, when they do, face interactions, focus groups, people don't like to talk about digestive health. One organization, it was even yogurt that said lactose-free on it. People didn't want to have that in their cart. They wanted the lactose-free to be small because it's embarrassing that they need a lactose-free yogurt. So there's a lot of layers. It's difficult to go to a food pantry and admit you need help. And then you're adding on this layer of food intolerance or food allergies that, just compound it. And I just kept thinking about it, and honestly, it just struck a nerve. And I said, I need to understand this food insecurity space. What is going on in the US, and how can I help people that have food intolerance? And so really it was an aha moment. And I decided that I was going to do an awareness campaign, and I gave myself 6 weeks to get everything together, which was ridiculous. And I was really discouraged by a couple family members, to be honest, like, you're crazy. What are you thinking? You're what? And I'm like, I am doing this. So first and foremost, you have to learn, you need to understand the space. So what is food insecurity? What is hunger? What is a food pantry? What's a food bank? How does this all work together? What is the infrastructure? Is anyone talking to one another? Who's helping people with food intolerance? Do they ask this question? Are we screening for food insecurity in our Clinic settings, there's so much that I uncovered you always have to understand the problem first. You can't just dive in. So hours calling, interviewing, talking to people, calling the National Celiac Association, talking to Food Rescue, which is an incredible organization. What are they doing? How are they helping? What are they seeing? Clancy Harrison, fellow dietitian, what are you doing? What's happening? So many different people interviewing, talking. So that was understanding the space and realizing that food insecurity is different than hunger. So hunger is, that physical sensation of feeling hungry. And many people, I shouldn't say don't experience that, but you can quell hunger with potato chips, right? You can quell hunger with some cheap crackers. Food insecurity is really lack of access to nourishing food to live a healthy life. So it's a little bit different, and it's important that we understand that. So in that 6 weeks prior, I had this vision. Being a creative, I wanted an Airstream, and I wanted it full of food. And we were going to travel down the East Coast, and I was going to meet with a number of different food pantries and Food Rescue and a number of different organizations. We're going to bring food. We're going to start discussions. We're going to raise media attention. And we did all of that. And I raised money for sponsors. So FODI and SHAR did financial donations, which I was able to then push forward to the National Celiac Association, which was doing incredible work helping get gluten-free foods to people in need. I was able to donate to Clancy Harrison, she was doing a lot of work in the food pantry space and in her work, which is food dignity. And then we filled the Airstream full of food, and we brought that down, and I had low FODMAP handouts, and I talked about the intersection, and I looked at what they had at these food pantries, and it was beans, and it was bread, and it was onion soup. I remember walking into one food pantry, being FODMAP sensitive to onions, and seeing a whole refrigerator filled with onions. And I almost just was like, ooh, this is great for the vast majority of people, but not for my FODMAP sensitive folks. And so just starting the conversation, leaving grocery lists. This is what someone with a FODMAP sensitivity can do. So we had multiple media reach out. We were on 2 news stations in 2 cities. We had press. It really did raise awareness. And then sort of the aftermath of that was my goal was to leverage my connection with industry in this space. How can I have them bring the food to the pantries that are actually asking the right questions and serving these patients with food intolerance or clients or guests? So, it's one thing to bring low FODMAP food to a food pantry, but if you're giving it to someone that doesn't require it, that's sort of missing the point. So we really starting the conversation around that. And we initiated the first ever low FODMAP section in a food pantry in Massachusetts at Project Just Because, which was incredible. And really opened up the dialogue between the National Celiac Association and a number of industries. Frito-Lay, Quaker jumped on board. So I'm constantly getting, questions. Where can we drop this off? What's going to be the best place to do that? So I know this is a long-winded answer. There was a lot that happened. And it was incredibly rewarding. It was another one of those highlights really of my career.
Did you know that your gut and your brain are connected? With IBS, there can be a miscommunication between the gut and the brain, which is why stress can be such a big trigger for symptoms. Nerva helps you self-manage your IBS symptoms through science-backed gut-directed hypnotherapy via a handy app that provides a structured 6-week program followed by a maintenance plan. This can help you calm your gut and your mind for IBS symptom management. Use the link in show notes to try Nerva today for 30% off. It was so needed. And whenever I saw that you were doing that, it was one of those, well, of course, that moment of like, yes, this is needed. This is absolutely needed. We know that. And, why has it taken so long? And so really glad that you've spearheaded that. With that awareness gained and starting with the amount of food pantries you were able to start with, what is that going to look like? Or is there a way to expand that throughout the rest of the United States? Is that something that is just going to take time? What is your vision for how that might expand in the future?
The vision really, from a very Kate Scarlata, what I can do, we need a lot of boots on the ground, but the goal is to really build, and I'm starting the list. These are pantries that are going to address the needs of people with food intolerance. Because I will tell you, I got pushback from many. And when you think like, oh, why, but during the pandemic, it was a whole different can of worms. They were no longer having people come into the pantry and select what they wanted to select. They couldn't do that anymore. There was too much risk associated with that. So people were getting pre-packaged boxes. You're a family of 6, here's your box for 6 people. It was wonderful, but it wasn't, there was one issue that came up with Clancy Harrison, and she said, people were leaving canned beans on the church steps, and the staff at the food pantry were saying, how dare they? Why, that's really, why are they leaving this? We're packing this beautiful package of food. And the reality was, having a conversation with me, I said, many people can't eat those beans. They wanted to leave them for someone else. It wasn't an insult or we don't want your beans. It was, these beans don't work for me and maybe someone else can. So I think there's a lot of learning that needs to go on. But the goal for me, Kate Scarlata, is to connect industry with food pantries that are in hope to grow those food pantries that will accommodate those that need special diets. It's a side hustle that I do and continue to do, and it's slow, but and there's certainly, more conversations to be had, but that's where we really need to raise awareness and then willingness on the side of the pantry to care for those patients or guests.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, that this isn't a preference, right? For a lot of people who are living with food intolerance, and especially food allergies, it's not just about preference. It's about quality of life, symptom management and control. And when someone's living in food insecurity, they also have the stress. There's a lot of layers to this where food and having access to the foods that will be nourishing and feel good can make such a huge difference. I think for those who maybe don't live with that, it can be easy to make a judgment without an understanding if you've never been in those shoes. What would you say? So kind of get into what is the impact of poor access to food for those who are living with digestive disorders or GI conditions? Like, what does that impact really look like from what you've seen in your experience, as well as in the kind of conversations that you had throughout this campaign?
Yeah, the impact is, it's complicated, right? So there's a lot of layers, and that's why listening is always really important, right? So if you don't feel well, to your point, you're not going to function in society well. You're not going to be the mother that you want to be, the father that you want to be, the worker that you want to be, the friend that you want to be, because you're rolled over in pain. So, there's layers. Certainly, we see IBS as, the second reason outside of cold that people call in sick to work or school. So it makes an impact. If those symptoms are controlled, then you're going to have a more efficient worker, a more efficient society, right? So there's just that basic there. I think there's a lot of layers that I uncovered. One of them was that in one of the lower income clinics that I attended, a vast majority of their clients did not read. And so if you don't read, then they were not educating them on modifying. How would you educate someone to modify FODMAPs if they can't read? Well, it took me 30 seconds, and I created a low literacy picture graph of foods to include and foods to minimize. Very simple graphic. Happy to share it as one of the notes, but I did that for the clinic, and they were able to use it to educate their patients that had low literacy. So low literacy may be mixed in, this low socioeconomics that are mixed into food insecurity is a complicated mix, right? The other thing that was interesting that I learned was one group, the same group, this was in North Carolina, had got vouchers for the farmers market, and they were going to give their food insecure patients a voucher. And this sounds beautiful, right? Of course. Well, the individuals thought that a food farmers market was uppity. They didn't feel comfortable there. They didn't listen. So everyone has to be at the table when you're talking about what the needs are, particularly the people that are affected. And I think sometimes we forget that. It gets too hierarchical and people are like, oh, the science, blah, blah, blah. No, the people that are living with this need to also be brought into the conversation. What can we do to help them feel better? And what are they willing to do? And going to a farmer's market sounded beautiful, but it was not a very, accepted donation amongst their clients and patients. So I think it's important to, know who you're talking to, what their needs are, what they see their needs are, and then come up with solutions. You can educate someone on inexpensive groceries, but if they're working 2 jobs and they have 3 kids, they want something quick and easy. They don't want the beans and rice that they have to cook. They want to whip into McDonald's because they have a 1-hour break between jobs. So there's a lot of layers to it, and understanding how you can help someone, just like, helping someone with IBS. It's not one size fits all. You need to understand the demographics and desires of the people that you're hoping, to help.
Absolutely. And for those listening who are not struggling with food insecurity, are able to kind of step up and help, right? Advocate, help, stand in the gap, if you will, so that those who are struggling aren't having to lift the weight of the work themselves. What are some of the ways that they can do that? Listening, you mentioned, is number one. Are there ways that you've learned through your advocacy that those who are listening might be able to do in their local community? Or is there a resource that you would recommend, or just anything someone could take action on right away?
So, well, first and foremost, I do have on my website an End Hunger Pain link, which I've identified a lot of organizations that would benefit from financial help. So there's a starting point there. All of these organizations are working with special diet needs. So, and there's ways to comment. So you make sure the money gets allocated towards that need. So there's definitely that. I think it is important to ask food pantries in your community, what is the best way to help? Because a lot of people think donations is the best way to help. But the reality is that food pantries have access to purchasing at very low cost food from food banks. And so their dollar goes a lot further than your dollar. The other thing is, when the post office or other people do food banks, take a moment and think, am I donating the cans in the back of the closet that I know I'm never going to eat? That's not eating or food dignity per se. So thinking about, could you donate something that might be a little bit more special or might be more appropriate for someone with a gluten-free needs? Maybe get a gluten-free product and donate that. So, with the intention that hopefully it gets in the right hands. You don't always know that, depending on what the pantry does. If you know your local pantry and, they may be, doing those kinds of, special diet needs, it varies, right? But yeah, you want to ask the questions, contact your local food pantries. What is it they need and what is the best way that you can help? Some people show up to volunteer one day. They don't really benefit from that. You benefit from that because it feels good. So yeah, definitely ask, because what you think might be like, oh, I went to the soup kitchen one day to help and then I disappeared for 4 years. It's a lovely gesture, but it might not be what's really going to be helpful. And then I will tell you, and this is a plug for Food Rescue, but I love this organization. I have no financial beneficial, reason to advocate for them, but what they do is they save the planet by saving food. So they rescue food that would normally be destroyed, which creates methane, which is not good for our planet. And so they'll go to Trader Joe's, pick up a collection of food and distribute it immediately. And they work off an app, and they're located in several states. So you can just get on the app, and if you have time, you can click and it'll say pick up at Giant Supermarket and drop off at St. Joe's Pantry. And if you have the time, you can do it that day. If you don't have the time, you pass it, and you just, so it's no dedicated commitment. But it's a great organization, not so much for the food intolerance space. They're really just rescuing food and getting it in the hands, but, beautiful produce, beautiful food, really beautiful organization. So that's something, individuals could look into. It's a low lift at your own timetable.
That's a great resource. And I can link all of that in the show notes as well, just so everyone has those resources to easily click on and move on from. And then from those listening that are struggling with access to food, because a lot of the people who are, listening to this show are those who are living with digestive concerns, whether that be, a celiac disease, IBD, IBS, undiagnosed issues that they've been struggling with. And if they're listening and they're thinking, well, that's me, I don't have access to foods, whether it be that they're out of work or maybe even that they live in a food desert where there's not a grocery store or something close by that they could go to, or, there's a strain on their family to buy those special foods. If they're just feeling that way, what are some resources that they could seek out? And maybe even some ways, let's say that their providers haven't done a good job screening and are making recommendations that aren't lining up with where they're at. Like, what are some ways that they could potentially, advocate for themselves in those spaces, or just some resources that they would have to help them out?
So, a lot of local churches will, have pantries associated with them. So in their local area, they may reach out to some of the local, churches or organized prayer groups. The other, through their healthcare provider, they should have access to a social worker, and a social worker could help also really help them connect with the right resources that are in the community. Because there was a number of reaching out when I was in North Carolina with Atrium Health. I identified a number of pantries and a number of organizations that were offering services for Atrium Health, and connected them, which was really interesting. And those providers, you did mention screening, and I know it's a simple 2-question screen for food insecurity. And it is within the past 12 months, we worried whether our food would run out before we got money to buy more, or within the past 12 months, the food we bought just didn't last and we didn't have money to get more. That's it. Those are the 2 simple questions. And you say yes to those, you are experiencing food insecurity. And food insecurity, I was food insecure in college, no question about it. I did not have the funds to provide a healthful diet to myself. I'm the youngest of 9 kids. I was very lucky to be in a private college, but I didn't have a food plan provided by my father, and I didn't enroll in it, and it was a struggle. So even people we know have experienced food insecurity. It's not like it's this small little, collection of people. During 2021, it was 1 in 6 people. It's actually gotten a little bit better, maybe 1 in 8 right now, but a lot of people are struggling with getting healthy food, not necessarily hunger. They may be getting, chips and cookies and crackers and filling up their bellies, but they're not nourishing themselves with adequate nutrients. So I would work with a social worker, and then some of the local, depending on their age, if there's youth groups or organizations, usually the churches are the first sort of, or areas of worshiping are the first sort of area to at least reach out and see what's in the local area if they're not familiar with that.
Great. That's a good resource. And then for the social worker, would that be something that they would just request like with the kind of office manager, with their provider? What's a really easy way for them to get in touch with their social worker and ask in a way that maybe doesn't feel like there's a lot of attention on them? I know that can be a hard thing to ask for. So is there kind of a best way to do that?
That's a great question. It would be through the primary care. Their general practitioner should be the linchpin to a social worker. And, it could simply, I'm not sure. That's a really good question. Like what the best way, but I would just say I'm concerned that my money is not accommodating for a healthy, nourishing, lifestyle, and that I may need help. That might be a hard ask. I know it is for a lot of people, or just to discuss, some, my needs, nutritional needs, and access, might be just simple. I'm concerned about my nutritional needs and access to healthy food.
Yeah, that's a great thing. We do have the Gut Community. It's our Facebook group where members of the Gut Show, those listening, can connect and have conversations after the show. And so if anyone has had a good experience with this, where you've been able to connect to a good resource or something that's been able to help you, feel free to go to the Gut Community and share that with others in this space, just so that you guys can connect with one another. So I know that can be so valuable, because just like with, IBS and digestive concerns, food insecurity is common. Like you mentioned, it's common. Others are probably going through it as well. And it helps to talk about it, to not feel so alone in that. Well, Kate, is there anything else that you want to share about this work, or about what you're hoping for the future, or just anything else that you want to share with our audience?
Well, just that we're all in this together, and I think it's important that, every little bit helps, and it might be a small gesture. I don't want to discount a volunteer at a soup kitchen, but, what can you do to help? It's a very challenging time, on a number of levels. We have mental health issues are through the roof right now: alcoholism, drug use, suicide risk. There's a number of things going on right now, just in our country and globally. And, just being kind to one another and patient, as a general rule, I think we can all benefit from that, and working together, raising awareness about food insecurity so that it isn't stigmatized, because it's very, very common. And one other last bit was the National Celiac Association is helpful in meeting gluten-free needs. So that's at a national level for individuals that may benefit. We don't have a FODMAP national association yet, but the National Celiac Association is helpful from a gluten-free standpoint if that is a diet, modification that you require.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kate, for all of your help, your work in this area. We look forward to seeing how that goes forward. And I really recommend that anyone listening follow Kate, connect with Kate as more comes out with the End Hunger Pain. I know that I Believe in Your Story campaign, everything that's there for patient advocacy, whether you are someone with IBS or not, join in and get kind of behind that, because it's going to do a lot of good. So thank you so much, Kate.
You're most welcome. Thanks for having me on, Erin.